On today's show, the first quarter of the season has not gone how anyone envisioned it for Evan Mobley. We need to talk about why it's been like that and why it's still a little too early to give up hope of an Evan Mobley leap this year. I'll tell you why on today's edition of Locked On Cavs.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, everybody. Welcome into another edition of Locked On Cavs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network in America. I'm your host, Andy Cunningham. I also cover the Cleveland Cavaliers over at my Substack, The Inside Shot. And you can find this show and any other Locked On podcast show anywhere you get your podcast. That means Apple, that means Spotify, that means anywhere else. Please do us a favor, give us a 5-star rating, leave us a nice review, and be a friend. Tell a friend about the show. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure a friend is subscribed as well. And if you're watching the show on YouTube as we get started, do us a favor, hit that thumbs up button for us, click subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content. And today's episode brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. That code is LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. So I've been sitting here, well, not sitting here directly. If you're watching on YouTube, I am back home now after being in Toronto for yesterday's show. So I've not been sitting here in the same seat all day, but I have been thinking because I had a 4-hour drive back from Toronto to Cleveland on Tuesday. So I did a lot of thinking, as one does on a long drive, about where things stand with the Cavs right now. And I think that this is a very good reflection point for the Cavs. And I understand that while they've not been whole for really any of the season, I don't think they've had a single game this year, even if you exclude Max Strus, because his injury is a long-term one. But if you take him out of the picture, they still have not had a single game this year where they've been fully healthy aside from Max Strus. So while I understand that, I do still think it is a decent reflection point. And the thing that keeps popping into my mind is the play of Evan Mobley, because so far this year, I think it's fair to say that Mobley has underwhelmed, right? He came into the season with expectations of a leap that was equal or greater than the leap that he took last year. And last year, as if you don't know, Evan was a first-time All-Star. He was a second-team All-NBA honoree for the very first time in his career. He won the Defensive Player of the Year award. Like, he was fantastic, right? Like, he was just absolutely phenomenal last season, and a big part of the reason why the Cavs won 64 games. And so far to start this year, not only has he not gotten better from who he was last year, the numbers would say that he's a worse player than he was last season. And that is obviously a bit of an issue. So I do think that there are some things to look at that are fair, and there are other things that need a little bit more time, right? And I will get to what I thought was the turning point for Evan last year and just how it kind of compares to what this year has been so far, because I do think that's an interesting conversation to have. But the first reason that pops into my mind about why Evan Mobley has played the way Evan Mobley has played so far this year is the differences in roles and what he has been asked to do last year and what he's been asked to do this year. And last year, he was more of a complimentary player, right? Like, he was very good. And he was, I think, the second best player on the Cavs last year when you consider the impact that he had on both ends of the floor, not just offense, not just defense, but how good he was on each end of the floor. And that matters as part of this conversation. But I also look at it and say, well, he was also surrounded with a lot of talent because Donovan Mitchell played 60 plus however many games, close to 70 games. Darius Garland played 75 games. Jared Allen played all 82 games. So whenever Evan was out there, he was around talent in a way that he hasn't necessarily been around this year, because not only has Darius Garland only played, I believe it's now been 5 games, and Jared Allen has missed a few games. And, you know, Donovan Mitchell has missed a couple of games, but for the most part, he's been healthy. But the Cavs have also been without a lot of role players for most of the season. And I think that matters in this conversation too, because Evan went from being asked to basically being somebody that can facilitate at times and can make the right reads and is very good at making the right reads. And I've always thought of him as somebody that is a good passer. Like, no one's going to call him one of the best passers in the NBA, but he is certainly a good passer. I think it's fair to say that. So he's been a good play finisher and a good secondary playmaker, play creator, whatever you want to term that. That's what he was last year. And this year, the Cavs have asked him to step into a more primary role as far as those things go. and it's not gone according to plan. Now, his role changed. The lift that the Cavs put on him is much different. Last year, and if you listen to this podcast every day or even maybe just once a week, you've probably heard me say about the rotations and how Kenny Atkinson changed those, and how Evan Mobley being out there without Donovan Mitchell as frequently as he has been this year certainly made life more difficult for Evan on a year where they're asking more of him. That was another challenge that I think was thrown his way. But I think all of those things have combined into Evan being this disappointing version of Evan Mobley through the first 19 games of the season. And it's not to say it can't get better, because I really do think that it can. But the one thing that I look at other than the role, because I think the fact that he has been in between roles, and right now, like, he is very clearly transitioning, because what the Cavs asked him to do at the start of the season is not what they're asking him to do right now. Like, his role over the course of the first 19 games has changed. And I think we always should have expected it to change when Darius Garland got back. But this has not been, in my opinion, something related to Darius Garland getting back. The change of his role, I think, is something that has more so been because he hasn't been able to do what was expected of him consistently enough in the role that the Cavs had him in for the first 15 or so games of the season. Maybe 12 or 13 is a more accurate number. But I think the one thing that has really held him back there is the fact that one of the things I talked about pretty frequently when I would speak about Evans taking the next step was that his handle needed to get tighter, that he needed to be somebody that was better at attacking off the bounce, because he's very athletic. He's not one of the best athletes in the league. Like, no one's going to confuse him with an Amen Thompson or an Asar Thompson or even Donovan Mitchell. Like, those guys are better athletes, but the combination of athleticism and length that Evan does possess makes him a very dangerous threat. And I do think that adding some strength there, which I do think he did, like, I think he's a stronger player than he was last year, that should have, to me, equaled Evan Mobley being able to get downhill more frequently than he has this year. And that hasn't been the case. And that, to me, is problem number one. If his handle were tighter this year, I do think that we'd be seeing a better version of Evan Mobley, because if nothing else, and I do want to say the fact that Evan has gotten to the free throw line more frequently is one of the big positives to take away from the first 19 games of the season. But if nothing else, if that handle were tighter, I think that there would be a lot more confidence surrounding Evan Mobley, because it's not that Evan is shooting the ball drastically worse. Like, yes, the free throw percentage is down, I believe, over 10 points from what it was. And that is the most, I think, unacceptable part of Evan's start to the season. The fact that he has shot the ball as poorly as he has from the free throw stripe. Like, that to me is the non-negotiable thing. Like, there are no excuses for that. And that is just thing number one, needs to get better before any of this matters. So that's inexcusable. But I think the rest of it's not necessarily that he's shooting the ball significantly worse. It's that he's taking his shot chart looks significantly different. So I went and looked this up. I pulled up his shot chart from the games so far this year and all of the games that he played in last year. And there were some pretty key differences. And the shooting percentages are not exactly the same, but they're within the same ballpark, that it's more, to me, on where his shots are coming from versus how many of them he's making. Like, yes, his shooting percentage is down just a little bit in the restricted area. I think it's down like 4%, which is a decent amount to be down, but it's not like, oh man, Evan Mobley stinks now because he's only making 72% of his shots inside the restricted area as opposed to 76%. Like, that is not the issue to me. The issue to me is what his frequency looks like inside there, because he's so far this year, he's making 72.5% of his field goal attempts inside the restricted area. League average is 66%. So, like, he has been fine in that area. It's the fact that he's only taking 37% of his shots inside the restricted area this year. Last year, he took 47, almost 48% of his field goal attempts inside the restricted area. That 10% difference, to me, is the biggest difference in Evan Mobley's offensive profile so far this year. It's not the fact that he's shooting threes a little bit worse. It's not the fact that, his turnovers are a little up. It's the fact that Evan Mobley has not been able to get to the basket as frequently. And yes, I do think a lot of that is the way the Cavs are asking him to get there. They're asking him to get there on his own much more than they were last year. But I even think we saw him be more effective at getting there on his own last year than we have so far this year. Like there are things in Evan's game that I thought were there last year and I thought were going to get much better that have not been as good this year. And getting to the rim on his own has been one of those. And I think that has led to some changes in other areas of his shot chart. Like, for instance, the non-paint restricted area is very slightly up. It's 1% up in terms of frequency compared to last year. So that's not necessarily something that is worth digging into, right? Like he's basically been the same player there, but his percentage of mid-range shots, the frequency of mid-range shots that he's taking has doubled. He went from 4% of his shots being mid-range shots to 8%, and he's been terrible on those. He's making around 20% of his mid-range looks, which is about what he did last year. But the fact that he's taking twice as many of them, I think is a big issue to his offensive profile right now. Like that is part of the reason why Evan has struggled offensively is because of his shot selection. Because you look at it and his 3-point frequency is up, which I don't think is a bad thing. It went from 25.2% of his shots being threes last year to 30.3% of his shots being threes this year. And the shooting percentages are largely the same there. Like last year, Evan Mobley had a better season from beyond the arc, certainly where he shot, I believe it was 37.5% or something like that. And this year he's shooting 36%, but that's not a big enough fall off to look at this and just say, yeah. So he shot 37% on the dot last year. He's at 36% on the dot this year. And that's with taking more threes like that. If you say Evan's going to shoot threes 1% less, but he's going to take 30% more, you will live with that trade-off. Like that is a good enough trade-off right there, considering his increase in volume. And I do think that 3-point percentage can stand to go up as we get going here. But the fact that his shot chart looks so different to me is the biggest difference. And it's because, yes, they've not had Donovan or Darius on the floor at all times with him to create those looks. But part of it is he hasn't been able to create those looks himself. Like he's not getting there off the dribble. And that to me is thing number one that I look at and just say, this needs to get better. This needs to be the thing that needs to improve for Evan. But I don't think that right now is the time to give up on Evan Mobley. And no, I'm not saying give up, but I should say the ship hasn't sailed. Maybe that's a better tease to the next segment. The ship hasn't sailed on Evan Mobley still taking a jump this season for the Cavs. I'll tell you why I think that is next right here on Locked On Cavs. But first, today's show is brought to you by Game Time. The NBA season in full swing, and nothing beats being in the arena for early season games. But let's be real, getting tickets can be a complete and total headache between waiting in queues, surprise fees, prices that jump right before checkout. It's easy to get frustrated when all you want to do is cheer on your team. Well, that's where Game Time comes in, because they're the app that gives fans the advantage. It's your ultimate life hack for scoring amazing NBA tickets fast, easy, and stress-free. The Cavs have a bunch of home games coming up. They're home on Sunday against Boston. Then they are on the road on Monday. Back at home next Wednesday against Portland. And then a weekend back-to-back with the Spurs. I know Wemby's not going to be there. And the Golden State Warriors. Yeah, Steph Curry's going to be in town next Saturday. So there are a lot of good games coming up at Rocket Arena. You're going to want to be in the building, and Game Time is the way to get your butt in a seat. What you have to do, download the Game Time app today, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA. That is LOCKEDON NBA, because Game Time going to take the guesswork out of buying your NBA tickets. So like I said, download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off that first purchase. Swipe, tap, ticket, go with Game Time. Thank you again for making today's edition of Locked On Cavs your first listen. Thank you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every single day. Like I said earlier, you can find this show and any Locked On podcast wherever you get them. That means Apple, it means Spotify, that means anywhere else. And I don't think Evan Mobley's season is going to be defined by the first 19 games that the Cavs have played. And I say that while everything I said in the first segment remains true. Evan has been a disappointment. Evan needs to be better. All of those things are true. But that doesn't define what this season's going to be. And I want to look no further back than what last year was like at the start of the season. So if you remember, opening night, the Cavs played in Toronto against the Raptors, and Evan had a great game. He looked super aggressive in that game. This was last season's opening night, not this season's opening night. But he had a great game. He totally outplayed Scotty Barnes. I think he finished with 25 points. Like, he looked aggressive, and it was a really, really good start to the season for Evan. And I think it made a lot of people believe very early on. And this year, he's had a few moments like that. Like, he had a game against Toronto where Donovan didn't play, Darius didn't play, Jarrett didn't play, and he, I think, had 29 points in that game. He was really, really good, but we've not had enough of those moments. But let's think back to, because I think last year for me, there was this one moment that I look at and say, that's when everything changed for Evan Mobley. That is when Evan kind of became that all-star, that all NBA type player, because he was good before it. And I don't think he's been bad now. I think bad is taking it too far. Underwhelming is fair, but like, he has still been a good, positive player for the Cavs, just not the star player that we anticipate him to be. And last year, I don't know that he was a star player necessarily prior to the game he had against the Charlotte Hornets. So let's rewind to that game, because that was a game that the Cavs played against the Hornets. It was in very early December. It was a Saturday afternoon in Charlotte. It was the front end of a back-to-back where the Cavs played the Miami Heat the very next day, and they lost the game against the Heat. But in that game against Charlotte, which the Cavs won 116-102, Evan Mobley finished with 41 points. He was 16 of 23 from the floor. He was 6 of 8 from 3. He was 10 of 15 from 2. Played 34 minutes, grabbed 10 rebounds as well, and was a plus 19 in those 34 minutes. And that was the moment where it's like, oh, this is the leap. This is Evan Mobley getting better. This is what Evan Mobley is going to become. This was a sneak preview of what is to come for Evan Mobley. And yeah, that was maybe Evan's best game of the year. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones that he had. I think that would probably qualify as his best one. He had another really good one against Dallas, had a good one against Minnesota, had a good one against Detroit. That opening night one against Toronto that I mentioned was awesome. So he had these really good games, but that's the one to me that really stands out. It's like, this is the future of Evan Mobley. And we've not seen enough of that this year, but it also made me go think, okay, well, what exactly did Evan Mobley look like last year before that game? Because while opening night was great and he had some good games, I don't know if underwhelming is appropriate, but I don't think prior to that game, Evan was necessarily playing at this all NBA level. Like, I thought at that point, and it is still too early to be having all-star conversations right now, but I thought at that point, Evan was like on the fringe of an all-star berth, right? He was like, maybe, if this guy has a good 4 or 5 weeks here, we'll really be having serious conversations about Evan Mobley being an all-star. And he went out and just did exactly that. But at that point, it wasn't, yes, Evan Mobley is going to be on the all-star team. I think a little bit of revisionist history can tell us, yeah, of course, Evan was going to be an all-star. But in the moment, I don't think it felt like that. So prior to that game, I think it was important to look at it like the week before. The Cavs played the Boston Celtics, and it was the second of 4 matchups with the Celtics. It was when the Celtics came to Cleveland, it was like 10 days after the Cavs went to Boston and lost their first game of the year. And the Cavs won that game because Donovan Mitchell had just an outstanding fourth quarter. He may have had 20 points in the fourth quarter. I don't remember exactly, but he rescued the Cavs that night, and they won that game because of it. But Evan had a game that was very underwhelming against Boston. And I think it was a bit of an eyebrow raiser where he was 4 of 13. He had 9 points. I think he had 11 rebounds. And he was, I thought, thoroughly outplayed by Kristaps Porzingis that game. And I think it led to some questions externally of, how do the Cavs actually really match up well with Boston if Kristaps Porzingis is on the floor? Like, can Evan Mobley do this? That was a question being asked. And I don't know if we're at that point. Like, we're not asking those questions right now about Evan, partially because we just have more data on who he is as a player. But after that, he kind of took off. And that was at about this point in the season last year. And before that game against Charlotte, Evan's effective field goal percentage was roughly 1% better than what it is right now. And that kind of tells me Evan is about where he was. Maybe it's marginally worse right now, but he's about where he was right now at this time last year. He's had some good games. He's had some bad games. Last year, he had some good games. He had some bad games. And then he really took off once he had a moment. And I think right now we're waiting for Evan Mobley to have that moment. And I do think that moment is going to come at some point. It's whether or not he can sustain after that moment is going to, I think, be the biggest question, because Evan is too talented. He's got too much potential to not be somebody that is better than he currently is. I think there are things that need to be changed in order to help him get there. But I look at what happened last year in that game against the Charlotte Hornets. And from that point on, Evan was a more aggressive player. He was taking more threes and he was making them at a higher clip. He was also making his twos at a much higher clip. And everyone thinks of that game as the jumping off point for him as a threat beyond the arc. And it was, but that was also from that point on, he shot around, I believe it was 5% better on 2-point attempts. And Evan Mobley can do that. He can be better, I think, in all facets. But if you look at who he was prior to that game last year versus who he has been so far this year, I think there are a lot of similarities. Now, can he get back to the guy that he was at the end of the season last year? I think he can, but I do think it's on him. It's on the Cavs. It's on the coaching staff. It's on his teammates. Really, it's on everybody involved to find a way to bring that out of Evan, because I know it's there. We have seen it. Like, we have proof that Evan Mobley is still capable of being that guy. There's no reason to think that because he's gotten off to a slow start this year, that he can't get back to what he was. I think the fair question is, can he be better than what he was? Right now, we don't have a good answer to that. And maybe we would have to lean no if we're being honest with ourselves, if we're asking that question. I think it needs to start with a couple of things changing specifically for Evan. I'll tell you what those things are and why I think they could really help next right here on Locked On Cavs. But first, today's show is brought to you by DripDrop. When I am hydrated, everything just works better. Focus, energy, mood, skin feels better, right? Like, so I mentioned this on the read for DripDrop the other day because I got a package of it in the mail and I tried it for the first time. And I have been consistently taking it since I got it in the mail. I think it was Saturday. I tried it for the first time and I feel so much better. And I am talking to you. It is 10 o'clock at night on Tuesday. And Sunday night, I covered a Cavs game at Rocket Arena. Monday, I drove to Toronto, covered a Cavs game, wrote a story for my Substack, did the Locked On Cavs podcast, went to bed super late, got up on Tuesday, drove back from Toronto, and I feel fine. If you think back to how I have felt after some of the other back-to-backs, like when the Cavs were in Miami and then played a home game the very next day against the Toronto Raptors, I felt terrible. I felt awful. Like the travel just absolutely kicked my butt. This time it didn't. And the only difference I think is DripDrop. DripDrop, I think, is a game changer for me. I'm speaking off personal experience here. They didn't write this in the copy. Like, I'm telling you, DripDrop has changed it for me. They've got 3 times the electrolytes and half the sugar of leading brands. And by using a science-backed formula trusted by medical professionals, firefighters, and over 90% of top college and pro teams, it's not just your average sports drink. And right now, DripDrop is offering podcast listeners 20% off your first order. So go to DripDrop.com. That is DripDrop.com and use the promo code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDON NBA. Again, DripDrop.com, promo code LOCKEDONNBA for 20% off. Stock up right now because the holiday season is coming. You're going to be exhausted. And if you're hydrated, if you're stocked up, you're going to have a much better holiday season. I know I certainly am looking forward to feeling so much better because of DripDrop. Again, head to DripDrop.com and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for 20% off your first order. Thank you again for making today's edition of Locked On Cavs your first watch on YouTube. And if you are watching right now on YouTube, do us a favor, hit that thumbs up button for us, click subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content. Things do need to change for Evan Mobley. And I think the very first thing, and it's a good time right now on the calendar because I'm talking to you on Wednesday morning right now as you're listening to this. And the Cavs didn't play last night. They don't play tonight. And they don't play tomorrow. Now, because this is Thanksgiving, it's not as if they're just going to have a ton of practice time. I'm sure they will be on the floor. I'm sure they will have a film session and whatnot prior to leaving for Atlanta for their game on Friday. But this is a time, I do think, for a bit of a mental reset for not just Evan, but for everybody. Like, I think that everybody on this roster is going to be very happy that they've got 3 days off for the first time this season. I think that Evan is the one that might need it most. I think that a mental reset could do him some good. I think that a physical break will do good for everybody, but I think it'll do good things for Evan Mobley too. And I think it's an opportunity for Evan to have a little bit of clarity on what his role is, what it needs to be, and what is being asked of him. Because I think it has changed throughout the course of this season. The Cavs were asking more of him at the start of the season than they've been asking of him recently. And yes, part of that is Darius Garland has been back and he's played a couple of games recently. And I would imagine that he plays on Friday and hopefully he plays on Sunday as well. Maybe not Monday in Indy, but hopefully he can consistently be on the floor. And that will make Evan's life easier. And I think that will make life for a lot of guys on the roster just a little bit easier for the Cavs. But I look at it and say, what role exactly do the Cavs want Evan Mobley to have? Do they want him to shoulder a lot of the offensive load? Do they want to go through those growing pains, which there have been growing pains, right? Like there have been nights where it just has not looked good, where it's looked forced and where there's been a lot left to be desired. Do they want him to just be a play finisher, which feel like you're not getting enough out of Evan Mobley, who's supposed to be the star player, if he's a guy that's just catching lobs and just finishing off plays as opposed to being able to create offense for himself and others and playing really good defense? Like, I think that what you're asking of Evan now is a good time to define it. And yeah, it might change a little bit, but I do think the best way to go might be, hey, let's get back to what we know works and we will slowly expand off of that as opposed to throwing everything at you at once, because that's kind of what the start of the year was for everyone was, hey, we know what you were last year. We're going to just try and make you be everything more this year. Like right away, go, go, go. And it didn't work. And I think if they get back to, and I think that the last couple of games have been part of the process of doing that. It hasn't been enough. I think they should be asking more of him, certainly than what he gave them against Toronto on Monday night. But I do think that they should be asking him to look like he did last year. Let's just start there, and then we'll grow from it. And I wonder if the mistake this year, now maybe mistake is the wrong way to phrase it, because the Cavs have to play the hand they're dealt, and they've not been healthy, and that matters as part of this conversation. Like, I think the ideal role for Evan is a little less than what was being asked of him at the start of the year, but the Cavs didn't have a choice because they were missing Darius Garland, because they were missing DeAndre Hunter, because they're still missing Max Strus. Like, those things do matter in this conversation. But I think that the Cavs need to get him back to being a successful piece of them on both sides of the floor. I think they need to get back to him being an aggressive player offensively and defensively and looking like the guy he was last year. And once they get back to that, then I think it's okay. Let's add some more things here. Let's throw in this wrinkle. Let's give this responsibility to Evan offensively. I think that should be the process. And I realize that we are just about 25% of the way into the season right now, but it does feel almost as if with this break and potentially another break coming up with the NBA Cup, if the Cavs don't advance to the knockout round, with those two things in mind, it makes me think this might be the right time to start trying to shape the roster a little bit differently, to start trying to shape that identity a little bit differently. And the reason why I think it should start with Evan getting back to who he was recently, to me, he's not looked like a confident basketball player. Now, there's no way to quantify confidence, right? You either are confident or you're not. There's not a metric I can look at. I can't go on Synergy and say, yes, this guy is this percent confident. Like, that's not how that works. And we all know that. But I think if you've watched Evan, if you've watched the Cavs, I think you have not seen a guy that is playing with peak confidence. And I think if the Cavs get him back to being the guy he was last year and putting him in that role and starting a little bit smaller and trying to build up from there, we will see a much more confident Evan Mobley. And if we see a more confident Evan Mobley that's able to do those things, then I think we will start to see Evan be able to add things. And then I think we will start to see potentially a better version of Evan Mobley than what there was last year. But I do think the Cavs need to get back to the strong foundation they have with Evan Mobley and build from there. If they do that, there's no reason to think that Evan can't be better later on this year than he was last year. But it's going to be a process to get there, and it's one that the Cavs do have to have patience with, but they have to be smart about as well. That's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Cavs. So thank you for making this your first listen. I know a lot of you are traveling out there. It's Thanksgiving week. So I appreciate you maybe making me just a small part, a half hour of your commute today. Maybe every day that you're traveling this week, it does mean a lot to me that maybe you want to listen to me, maybe around friends, family, while you're in the car, or potentially on a plane to some other destination to spend the holidays. So thank you for that. And thank you for finding this show every single day. You can find it anywhere you get your podcast. That's Apple, that's Spotify, that is anywhere else. Please give us a 5-star rating, leave us a nice review, be a friend, tell a friend about Locked On Cavs. We are on YouTube as well. So hit that thumbs up button as we get out of here. Click subscribe and hit that notification bell. And I will be back tomorrow morning talking more about the Cleveland Cavaliers.